We're going to now move into the subject of technology, which is obviously one of the most important issues that we tackle at AFF. And I'm delighted to introduce JiaJia Fei, who is a digital strategist and cultural influencer, who earlier this year launched what she calls the world's first digital agency for art. Before that, JiaJia worked in digital marketing for the Guggenheim Museum, and then became the first director of digital for the Jewish Museum, where she catapulted that institution into the digital age by increasing the social media following by 1,000%, which we'll hear more about. JiaJia, thank you so much for joining Arts Funders Forum.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So the first question is about a Financial Times profile of you just a few months ago that noted that you consider yourself a translator of sorts, meaning that as someone who creates and distributes digital content about the arts on social media, that you are required to make the intimidating and inaccessible vocabulary of the art world more appealing and accessible to those outside the art world bubble. JiaJia, can you talk a little bit about how you approach this process and also kind of what you've learned over the years about doing this?
Yeah, of course. And since this is a conversation about fundraising, I think accessibility is really at the root of the most significant issue I see in the future of arts funding, which is the reality that our older and more traditional donors are aging, dying, and we can no longer rely on this past generation of Rockefellers and Carnegies and the people who really established these cultural institutions. The next generation of philanthropists, like it or not, are people in tech. They're the Zuckerbergs, the Elon Musks, the tech entrepreneurs. And we all know the language of art can be alienating and feel very contrived, privileged, elitist. Let's not forget a year ago, a banana sold for over $100,000 in Miami, actually several bananas. And so for the tech world to care about investing in the future of culture, they need to understand its value in society and how art relates and improves the work that they do. And technology companies were founded on these equalizing principles of the web, being open source and democratic. And until the two can equalize and have the same goals, the future of arts funding is really at risk.
Oh, indeed, and obviously that's so core to what our kind of animating thesis is, and we're so happy that you're able to kind of put a finer point on that message, and I think we're all here to kind of learn from that, from your legacy working on that problem. One of the issues, I think it's somewhat related, is how notoriously slow the cultural sector has been to adopt new technologies, and you've made that point often in your career. And a lot of people in our community are interested to think about how specifically technology can support fundraising and community engagement. You've often noted that for a visually driven industry run by creatives, it's quite surprising that digital adoption has been somewhat anemic. Why would you say, JiaJia, that is? I mean, why is the cultural sector somewhat slow to adopt historically? Maybe that's changing. We'll hear your views on that as well. And what do we do about it?
So museums and gallery experiences are operating on business models that prioritize physical objects and physical experiences with art. We all know that art is, at the end of the day, a social experience. It can't completely be replaced by technology. But the outcomes of how we talk about art, learning, education, exchange of ideas, and even the distribution of information can, of course, be facilitated by all these digital tools that have been created for the rest of the world and the rest of other industries. And as institutions, we're behind because we still continue to prioritize the brick and mortar experience. COVID, of course, has changed it all completely because everything's been closed. Instead of investing in technology systems up until now, we've been operating on, if anyone's ever worked at a nonprofit, systems that really don't scale to the way the rest of the world is operating. Our core systems when it comes to collections management, CRMs, they're often systems that are only operational on PCs, if anyone's worked at a nonprofit and are familiar with Razor's Edge or TMS. And there are also few technology experts who can leverage these systems and have that dual understanding of both art and technology.
Well, so JiaJia, let's pick up a little bit on your point about the events of 2020. So what we keep reading about in terms of the macro trend is that digital acceleration obviously has been happening at record pace this year due to for obvious reasons. Are there any specific stories that you can tell about how the cultural sector has adopted or accelerated digital in 2020 out of necessity or otherwise?
I think the learning right now is because of the pandemic. We used to have this conversation about should we prioritize the digital or the physical, and it's no longer a question of either or. It's the reality of embracing yes and having to do kind of both. So this also speaks to the resources required to have this dual existence. So the rigor and care that we assign to physical art experiences, in terms of curating and the research and all of the labor that goes into what you see when you go to a museum or a gallery or even any type of art space, that entirely has to be replicated in a way on a digital scale, and you need to have the workflow and infrastructure and the people to support it, which I think not very many institutions have been prepared for. But I think the optimistic outcome of this is we're able to have conversations like this with people across the world. We're able to open up and solve the problem of space. So museums previously invested millions and billions of dollars on these expansion projects, of course, to increase the capacity of the audiences that they wish to reach. But now people are realizing, we can continue to do a lot of what we do as institutions with tools, in the online space. And I think the most successful projects have been ones that do embrace the reality of what we're using right now. So, limitations of the screen. We know that art has always been shaped by the world around it. And if the experience of looking at art today is this experience, on your phone and on your computer, can we prioritize digital art and art that was born digital and designed for the limitations that we're experiencing. So I've definitely seen some really amazing projects in AR as well, projects that really leverage the social capacity of technology and making sure that people continue to have ways of exchanging ideas and being able to interact with other people online.
JiaJia, were there any, when you meet with prospective partners or considering the work that you did at the Guggenheim or the Jewish Museum, are there any kind of, strategies at a high level that you can share with our audience that you might articulate to some of your partners? Any tricks of the trade that just are maybe frameworks for thinking or strategic ideas that you would relay that you might want to just drop one or two of those with this community today?
Sure. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to trying to fundraise and reach a bigger audience, it's all about storytelling. So being able to really understand the message and the mission is perhaps even more important than understanding the technology components. Yes, you need to have a system and all the different backend support to be able to execute certain tasks. But being able to really be compelling and to make a difference really comes back to our original conversation at the very beginning. So creating the space for accessibility and making sure that we have this open, exchange with potential funders who can be these world builders that can support institutions moving forward. I think on a micro level, there are some really great examples of fundraising platforms that do support artists that have adopted, a subscription model, whether it's like Patreon or, Kickstarter, that's been around for a while. But to really make a difference, to move mountains, we need to have the continued partnership of technology companies.
Well, what a wonderful message, really, to share about connecting, fundraising to storytelling and making sure that institutions, artists, others that are especially going through challenging times right now and also plan to evolve their fundraising in the future can really think about that kind of meta concept as we move forward out of the pandemic. So thank you, JiaJia. One other quick point that I wanted to ask you about is that, you know, you made some very interesting comments in the past about noting that whereas other creative industries such as music, fashion, TV, and film have been so dramatically transformed by Netflix or Spotify, platforms like that, the arts is incredibly experiential, social, multi-channel, as you've pointed out. Is your point that the arts, kind of broadly speaking, are too complex to be filtered through these types of, you know, popular apps and platforms? Is this something that artists and institutions and funders, you know, need to think about more?
Yeah, I think I would also flip your question a little bit and think about how the world has changed because of these singular technology platforms that have replaced movie theaters like Netflix and Spotify and you know, record stores and Spotify. So you know, even before the pandemic, we saw the mass closure of many of these businesses because there was this way of directly transferring everything that you would do in terms of culture and entertainment onto a singular app. That app just does not exist for the art world. You can't download a single app and have the same experience as watching a movie or listening to a song. Art is so multidimensional, and nothing can ultimately replace, you know, being in the middle of a video installation, looking really closely at a painting. And so these attempts to replicate the art experience, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I saw just no shortage of people trying to do like 360 tours and VR experiences. And ultimately, these experiences always fall short because they're isolating. So it's no longer a question about replicating, but going back to the beginning, this idea of translation. We can take the conversations and, you know, the social, I guess, object around art and make that into something digital, but we can't completely replace the experience of looking at art.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I just, one quick question before we let you go, JiaJia. Have you seen in your practice the notion that fundraising through technology can be democratic? That has become a talking point in the arts, and it's something that we're all striving for, is to broaden the scope of who's involved with arts and culture. And I know institutions struggle with whether to prioritize mega donors with micro donors. And I'm curious to know whether you've seen anecdotally or otherwise that technology is leading the sector in a trajectory that might imply that there are ways to reach the kind of funding goals that we all need to reach through democratizing fundraising through technology.
I think it isn't yet, but it should be. So again, you know, the platforms we're all using, every type of technology tool was built on being democratic and widely accessible to all people. So there's definitely no reason why by leveraging these tools, we can expand our donor base awareness and even just ongoing support of art. I think, you know, to really think about the future of art, you know, these partnerships that need to happen between artists, collectors, and donors need to really follow as the models and even the form of art progresses. So it's ultimately going to be an inevitability, and hopefully there will be systems in place that can support that type of scale.
Fantastic. Well, that's an optimistic note to end on. I think we're all looking forward to expanding the communities that we engage with in the cultural sector. And I know that this is an important way that we'll do that. So JiaJia, so kind of you and generous to lend us your time and insight today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.